Acquiring a business? BizNexus simplifies it. Access thousands of updated opportunities in our DIY marketplace or supercharge team sourcing with OmniSource, your all-in-one platform for on-market, off-market, and coming-soon deals. Scale smarter today. Learn more or book a demo at www.biznexus.com.
Disclaimer from the always present legal team. Podcast conversations don't necessarily reflect the views of BizNexus Incorporated. Everything you hear is informational news and updates from around the industry. We're not recommending any investments. We're not offering any investment advice. Be sure to do your own homework.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going deep on the SBA 7A loan program.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, this program has had a huge impact on the economy, by making it easier for small businesses to get funding.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have some really interesting insights from this Twitter thread by SBA Ray to help us understand it.
So for those of you who might not be familiar, the 7A program is basically the government partnering with banks to make lending to small businesses less risky.
Right, it's a loan guarantee program. So the SBA is essentially saying to the bank, hey, we'll share some of the risk if the business defaults.
So that makes the bank more likely to lend to businesses they might not have considered otherwise.
Exactly, and it's been a real game changer for a lot of small businesses.
So where do we even begin with a program like this? I mean, it's got such a long history.
Well, SBA Ray actually starts by taking us back to the early 2000s, like the dot-com boom era. And what's interesting is that this is when lenders really started to see the 7A program as a market worth going after.
That's interesting. So why the sudden interest? Did lenders just become more altruistic?
Well, not quite. It was more about the rise of the Business Development Officer, or BDO.
Okay, the BDO. So what do they do?
These were people hired specifically to find and cultivate SBA loan opportunities.
So like salespeople for SBA loans.
Yeah, basically. And companies like CIT and GE Capital really jumped on this trend. Like CIT had a team of over 100 BDOs by 2006.
Wow, that's a serious commitment.
Yeah.
It seems like they really saw the potential of this program.
Yeah, they did. And it really changed the game in terms of how many businesses were able to access 7A loans.
But then SBA Ray mentions this big hiccup in 2004. What happened there?
There was a temporary lapse in funding for the SBA.
Oh no, so like the government shutdown kind of situation.
Kinda, yeah, and it caused a major disruption to loan approvals. Imagine you're a small business owner counting on that funding, and suddenly everything comes to a halt.
Yeah, they'll be devastated. So how did they fix it?
Well, this funding crisis led to a pretty significant change in the way the program was structured. They introduced the zero-subsidy model.
Zero-subsidy meaning?
Meaning the program is now funded through fees from lenders and borrowers instead of direct appropriations from Congress.
So like a self-sustaining system. That's pretty clever.
Yeah, it was a way to ensure the program could continue operating even without consistent funding from the government.
But doesn't that make it vulnerable? Like, what happens if there's an economic downturn and loan defaults increase?
You're exactly right. That's the inherent risk with the zero-subsidy model. If the fees aren't enough to cover the losses from defaults, the whole system could be in trouble.
That's a bit scary considering how important this program is for so many businesses.
It is, and that vulnerability actually became a recurring theme in the history of the 7A program, as we'll see later on.
Okay, so we've seen how the program was kind of reshaped by this funding crisis, but then we have the 2008 financial crisis.
Oh, yeah, that was a wild time.
Did the 7A program have any role to play in helping businesses recover?
Absolutely. In fact, the SBA actually stepped up their support in a big way.
How so?
They increased the loan caps to $5 million.
Wow, that's a significant jump.
Yeah. And they even started offering 90% guarantees on some loans with fee waivers.
Yeah.
They were basically saying, we're here to help you get through this.
That's really impressive. Yep. So the government was really committed to using the 7A program as a tool for economic recovery.
They were, and it had a big impact on the lending landscape. This is when we saw the rise of new players like Live Oak Bank, who really embraced SBA lending and eventually became the top 7A lender in the country, even surpassing giants like Wells Fargo.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
A true underdog story. It shows how government policies can have a ripple effect on the market and create opportunities for new players.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of how the 7A program is constantly adapting and evolving to meet the needs of small businesses and the economy as a whole.
So we've talked about the internet boom, the funding crisis, the 2008 recession, but then comes a whole new set of challenges with the COVID-19 pandemic in the 2020s. How did the 7A program navigate those choppy waters?
Yeah, the pandemic definitely threw a wrench in the works, but before we dive into that, let's take a quick break and come back to explore how the 7A program faced those challenges and what's happened since then.
Sounds good. We'll be right back after a short break to continue our deep dive into the history of the SBA 7A loan program. All right, so before the break, we were talking about the COVID-19 pandemic and how that must have been a crazy time for the 7A program.
Oh yeah, it definitely threw a curveball into the mix, but the thing is, the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP, that everyone remembers from the pandemic,
Oh yeah, the PPP.
that was actually a separate initiative designed just for pandemic relief. It wasn't part of the 7A.
Right, right. I remember that. But even though they were separate, I feel like there must have been some overlap or at least some impact on the 7A program from all the PPP stuff.
Yeah, you're right. There were definitely some ripple effects. One big one was the SBA's increased focus on risk mitigation after all the, fraud and stuff with the PPP.
Yeah, that makes sense. They're
Yeah.
probably trying to avoid making the same mistakes twice.
Exactly. So in 2023, they implemented this thing called the Risk Mitigation Framework.
Okay, the risk mitigation framework, what was that all about?
Basically, it added an extra layer of scrutiny to the lending process. Like before, lenders could issue something called a PLP, which is basically a pre-approval for a 7A loan.
Right, like a green light saying, hey, you're good to go.
Exactly. But with this new framework, the SBA had to approve all those PLP submissions.
So like another hoop for lenders to jump through.
Yeah, and a lot of lenders felt like it was unnecessary, especially for those who already had a good track record with SBA loans.
Right, if you've been a responsible lender for years, why should you have to deal with all this extra bureaucracy?
That was their argument, and they also said it slowed down the whole lending process, which made it harder for businesses to get the funding they needed.
So it sounds like the SBA was trying to strike a balance between protecting taxpayer dollars and making sure businesses could still access capital.
Yeah, it was a tough spot to be in for sure. And on top of all that, the SBA also made some major changes to the 7A program itself in 2023.
Really? Like what kind of changes?
Well, they rolled out a new standard operating procedure, or SOP, and one of the biggest changes was to the definition of a small loan. They increased the threshold from $350,000 to $500,000.
Okay, so more loans would be considered small
Yeah.
and I guess processed more quickly.
Exactly. And they also made some changes to the equity requirements and streamlined some of the affiliation rules. They even allowed for partial changes in business ownership.
It sounds like they were trying to simplify things and make the program more accessible.
That was the idea, but not everyone was happy about these changes.
Oh, really? Why not?
Some lenders felt like the changes were too drastic and worried about unintended consequences. Like, remember, this is all happening right after the PPP issues, so there was a lot of anxiety about fraud and risk.
Yeah, that makes sense. So lenders were kind of on edge, and then the SBA comes in and makes all these big changes to the program.
It was a lot to process, for sure, and some lenders felt like the SBA was prioritizing simplification over program integrity.
So basically, they were worried that making things easier might actually increase the risk of defaults.
Exactly. And remember that whole zero-subsidy model thing we talked about earlier?
Oh, right. So if default rates go up, the program could be in trouble.
Precisely. So it was a very delicate balancing act for the SBA, trying to make the program more accessible while also mitigating risk and ensuring its long-term sustainability.
So with all these changes, anxieties, and the looming threat of rising default rates,
Yeah.
how did things actually shake out? Did the program survive?
Well, according to SBA Ray's analysis, it seems like the changes have largely achieved their goal of making the program more accessible. More businesses are getting access to capital, which is a good thing.
That's good news, but I still can't help but worry about those default rates.
Yeah, that's the big question mark right now. The program's future really hinges on whether those default rates stay manageable.
And if they don't, what happens then?
Well, the SBA might have to make some tough decisions, like tightening lending standards, increasing fees, or even reducing loan guarantees.
Which would make it harder for businesses to get loans.
Exactly. It's a tough situation. But the 7A program has proven to be pretty resilient over the years, so there's reason to be optimistic.
I hope you're right.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here? I mean, the 7A program is obviously important, but it seems like it's facing some pretty serious challenges.
It is, but it's also part of a larger ecosystem that's constantly evolving, and I think it's important to understand those broader trends if we want to really grasp the future of small business financing.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of those bigger trends shaping the landscape for small businesses and how they might impact the 7A program in the years to come.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about some of those bigger trends shaping the landscape for small businesses and how they might impact the 7A program in the years to come. Well, one of the biggest trends we're seeing is the rise of fintech, financial technology.
Right, fintech.
Yeah, exactly. These new online lenders are using technology to really streamline the whole lending process.
Makes sense. I mean, everything's going digital these days.
Right, and it's putting pressure on those traditional lenders to adapt. They have to keep up with the times.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how the 7A program can adapt to these innovations. I mean, it was designed for a different era.
Yeah, that's a real challenge for the SBA going forward. Another trend to keep an eye on is the rise of impact investing.
Impact investing. So like investing in companies that are doing good for the world.
Yeah, basically, investors are looking for more than just profits. They want to support businesses that are making a positive social or environmental impact.
So it's not just about the bottom line anymore.
Nope. And this shift in priorities could have a big impact on the types of businesses that get funding, including those seeking 7A loans.
So the program might need to evolve to better align with these changing values.
Exactly. And then, of course, we can't forget about the good old political landscape.
Oh, yeah. The politics of it all.
Right. Government policies and regulations have a huge influence on access to capital for small businesses. We saw that with the zero-subsidy model.
Yeah, that was a big turning point. And depending on who's in charge, we could see even more changes to the 7A program down the road.
Absolutely. So it's a program that's constantly in flux, shaped by all these different forces.
It's a lot to keep track of, but it sounds like it's important for small business owners to stay informed about all these trends and changes.
Oh, definitely. Knowledge is power, right? The more you understand, the better equipped you'll be to navigate the world of small business financing.
So what are some of the key takeaways from our deep dive today? What should our listeners be thinking about as they try to make sense of all this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the 7A program, while incredibly important, is constantly evolving. It's been shaped by economic forces, political decisions, even global pandemics, and its future is far from certain.
Right? There's still a lot of open questions, like can it handle rising default rates? Will it adapt to fintech and impact investing? How will future policy changes affect it?
All great questions, and only time will tell what the answers are. But one thing's for sure, the 7A program has a long history of supporting small businesses, and it's going to continue playing a vital role in the economy for years to come.
It's definitely a program worth watching, learning about, and advocating for. It's a reminder that the world of small business financing is always changing, so staying informed and adaptable is key for borrowers and lenders alike.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into the SBA 7A loan program. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for tuning in to the deep dive. We hope this episode has been insightful and maybe even a little bit inspiring. Remember, the world of small business is full of challenges, but it's also full of opportunities. So stay curious, stay informed, and never stop chasing your dreams until next time. Happy diving.
Thinking of exiting your business or taking on a private equity partner to help you grow faster? BizNexus has you covered. Tap into our network of thousands of best-fit investors, acquirers, and proven M&A advisors, and we'll help you begin the relationship confidentially on your terms, your timeline. Learn more at biznexus.com.